Well, hello everybody and welcome to the October edition of the European Urology podcast. My name is Declan Murphy, urologist here in Melbourne, joined by my co-host Dr Joyce Baard in Amsterdam. Joyce, hello, thank you for joining us.
Hi Declan, good to be here again.
It is good to be here again. So this is our second edition of the podcast, and thank you to all of our listeners who have sent us lots of feedback. We love the feedback on social media and some direct contacts. We love your suggestions, don't we, Joyce? We want to hear what our audience want to hear on something like this monthly podcast from European Urology.
Yes, of course. We really want to hear your feedback because we can take that input for a new episode. So really subscribe to our channel and leave some comments. If you have suggestions how to improve or new content you want to hear, please connect with us.
Absolutely, do that, and you'll find links in the show notes and up on the screens. We post this on YouTube as a video podcast and of course on Spotify, Apple, Google Podcasts, everywhere else you can find it. And coming up in this month's episode, we're sticking with a similar format to our first episode. We have two key papers that ourselves and Alberto Briganti, our editor-in-chief, have selected out of all the fantastic content in the October edition. We also have Nikita Bhatt joining us again to quickly highlight some other things that caught her eye in the journal. And we have coming up later on a treat for those of you who like listening to hear what editors really have to think about the journal and about publishing, because I was in Milan last week and I had a chance to catch up with the current editor-in-chief, Alberto Briganti, and previous editor-in-chief 2 times past, Francesco Montorsi, based in Milan as well. So stay tuned for that great catch-up with editors past and present coming up later in the journal. But first of all, Joyce, the first paper that was selected out this month is the 21-year update of the ERSPC from the Rotterdam section, and you had a chance to catch up with study author Monique Roobol and prostate cancer expert Peter Albers to talk about this key paper. So let's cross over and hear what they had to say to you about this very nice paper in this month's European Urology.
So for our first discussion, I'm very happy to introduce our first guest, and actually one of my Dutch colleagues. It's Professor Monique Roobol. She's an epidemiologist and professor of decision-making in urology at the Erasmus Medical Center in Rotterdam at the Department of Urology. She's also the head of the scientific research office in her department and in the lead of several large international clinical and population-based screening studies on prostate cancer. She's here today to discuss the latest publication, SPI, of the very well-known European randomized study of screening for prostate cancer, the ERSPC. And today she will present the outcomes of impressive evaluation of 20-year follow-up results. So welcome, Monique, to this podcast.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this very nice introduction. Yes.
We have a second guest for this section, and our second guest is Professor Peter Albers. He will discuss with us, together with Monique, the outcomes of this new publication. Professor Peter Albers is the chairman of the Department of Urology of the University Hospital in Düsseldorf in Germany. And of course, we know him as a board member of the EAU and chair of the Scientific Congress Office. So welcome, Peter.
Welcome to all of you. Thanks a lot.
So Monique, before we invite Peter to take over the discussion with you, we know the ERSPC was initiated back in the early 90s, where I think a lot of our listeners were just starting high school at the time. So could you please give us a brief summary of the project and of course the latest outcomes of this project?
Yes, of course. Thank you. Well, actually, the ERSPC started in 1991, and I must admit I was part of that, so I was not in high school anymore. And we started in the Netherlands and Belgium with some pilot studies. And in 1993, ERSPC started as a whole with all the centers that are listed in the publications. Obviously, in 2009, we published our first results in the New England Journal of Medicine. So with hard working between 1993 and 2009, showing that screening actually resulted in a prostate cancer mortality reduction relatively of approximately 20%. We have updated that in 2012, and after that have published our results again also in European Urology. The relative mortality reduction remains approximately around 20%, but the absolute mortality reduction is increasing over time, which immediately affects the numbers needed to invite and numbers needed to diagnose. The paper we are currently talking about is based on ERSPC Rotterdam data only. Please be aware of that. It's a large center, 42,000 men are randomized in the period 1993 up to 2000. And we are in the position of specifically also looking at metastasized disease, because that is all something we clearly monitor within ERSPC Rotterdam.
So thank you for this really nice introduction of the study. I will hand it over to Peter. I'm sure you have a lot of questions.
Hello, Monique and team. Congratulations to this update, which is, I think, very important. My first question would be, the reduction in mortality is now about 27%, which is a little bit higher than the previous reports. And if you subtract people that did not attend, then it rises to 51%. But still, in absolute numbers, this is less than 100 deaths that can be avoided in this group of 40,000 people randomized to this trial. Do you still think that prostate cancer-specific mortality is the future endpoint of screening strategies?
Well, it is the most, let's say, secure endpoint, obviously. And I must note with that it requires a lot of investment to accurately label someone with dying from prostate cancer. Let that be said, that's true. But it is the most definite event, and something that patients are really asked. That's their first question when they are diagnosed with prostate cancer, obviously, is the question, will I die of it? So in that respect, I would say, yes, we certainly need to follow up all our work, what we are doing, and looking at prostate cancer-specific mortality, for sure. The other one is obviously, and that's why we have this in this manuscript, is metastasis, because that is something that causes a lot of deterioration of the quality of life and takes many, many years. So that is something that is definitely on our radar, and that's why we also in Rotterdam have still now for more than 25 years a detailed follow-up also on metastasis at time of diagnosis and those that occur during follow-up. And as you can read in the paper, that is extremely important, because only looking at metastasis at time of diagnosis doesn't give the whole picture, as is clearly shown in the paper.
I just want to follow on this idea of metastasis-free survival, because this is, I think, very new data in this paper, that metastasis-free survival was much higher in those that were screened. Its difference was 33%. And what was striking for me is that all of the metastasis differences was detected as the first screening visit and not during further follow-up. How is this to be interpreted? Does it mean that the initial treatment was very successful in those guys that were in the screening arm, so that you could prevent metastasis over time for those? And that is the explanation that only in the first visit the difference in metastasis was striking?
No, I think it's more the design of the trial. Obviously, it's a cross-sectional design, ERSPC Rotterdam. So we started screening in the age group 55 up to 74, meaning that people had a first screening also at the age of 74. And normally when you start a population-based screening trial, people grow into the trial. Obviously, that's a totally different picture. Let that be very clear. This is a cross-sectional design. So what we did in the first screening round is just starting screening a group of men. And obviously men were randomized to the screening arm, but already had metastasized disease. they were detected within the screening algorithm and got a label screen detected prostate cancer while it was metastasized. There we had a lot of metastasis, obviously in the initial screening route. And later on, then you see the effect of repeat screenings, because then you see it disappearing. But again, I'm talking about at time of diagnosis. The most important message for me is that during follow-up, still, we diagnose men that are labeled as non-metastasized at time of diagnosis, but they still develop metastasis during follow-up. And this is something we have to look very closely at what is happening there. Overall, we still have this reduction of about 30%. But obviously, if you look at the reduction at time of diagnosis, which is far higher, we would really like to learn from those cancers that are detected, screen detected, and still develop metastasis, apart from those that are, due to the cross-sectional design, were already too late at time of diagnosis. Yeah. So important lessons to be learned here from this data.
At the time when the trial started, a man died of prostate cancer with bone mets within 1.5 years. Now this is different. Patients can be treated for a long time, sometimes 10 years survival with lymph node mets. And how does this influence the results in the future? Because you are the only section, as I understood, that controls for follow-up as compared to the other ERSPC sites that stopped their analysis for prostate cancer-specific mortality. But I think in terms of metastasis, we have a different area now. People live with metastatic cancer for a long time, which is very expensive and is a reduction in quality of life. Does this somehow influence your interpretation of your results and your follow-up?
Well, let me be clear that all ERSPC centers are still active and are still actively collecting prostate cancer mortality data. So that is a thing that must be sure. The collection of metastasis is something that is an extra, and that's what's being done in the Dutch center in detail. But all the other centers collect mortality data, and we are aiming to do so for at least a few years still. We are now currently at a point where, at least in the Netherlands, in Rotterdam, half of the men that were initially randomized have died. As soon as that comes higher, so in 60 or 70% of the men that have died initially randomized, we can get a better insight of what really is the effect of our screening intervention. And this is what we are aiming for. And of course, like you said, it might take longer, but on the other hand, our men were randomized more than 23 years ago now. So we will have a long follow-up, and I think we will catch this if we continue for the coming years. Definitely, it goes now, unfortunately, very fast with our cohort. It's declining very rapidly. So I think we will get a good insight in the total effect after a few years.
May I have a last comment on overdiagnosis? Because the number needed to diagnose is now dramatically reduced to 7 and 14 regarding metastasis or death. Would you think this is the upper end and overdiagnosis is not such a big problem?
No. Sorry, I would not say that. Our number needed to diagnose and our overdiagnosis obviously is changing due to the fact that the control arm is catching up regarding incidence. So that's something you need to be aware of with this data, comparing two arms. Overdiagnosis is an important issue. And of course, we have come very far with reducing this. I'm totally happy with now having risk stratification, having MRI, again, a risk stratification, stopping screening at an elderly age. Everything, people become more aware what to do about overdiagnosis and certainly about overtreatment. So that's a good thing. But it is an issue in prostate cancer screening, and we should be aware of it constantly. Never forget this. And so working on this constantly to reduce this as much as possible, but we are on the right way. I'm sure of that. Yeah.
For the last question, the comparison to breast cancer screening, because the data, which is probably not clear to everyone, are now much better than those data that are published regarding breast cancer screening for number needed to diagnose, for example, or number needed to invite.
Yeah.
Do you have any explanation why prostate cancer is not a strategy like organized screening like breast cancer?
Well, I'm always very hesitant to compare different types of screening trials. You must be sure that the length of follow-up, the numbers of person years that you compare are comparable, actually, because otherwise you are comparing apples with pears. There is one study that was done in 2001 where they compared breast colorectal screening on the basis of 800,000 person years. I've done that for ERSPC just to get an idea where we were with prostate cancer screening. And yes, those are comparable. So we are not worse, but also not better as the other screening programs. And that's something we should always keep in mind and work on to make it even better. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Monique. Great trial. Congratulations to the whole group.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you all to the listeners also. Thank you.
Yeah, well, thanks very much, Joyce. That was a fascinating discussion. Peter Albers, by the way, was joining us from a train in Germany. It's a public holiday there. We're very grateful to you, Peter, for joining us, but apologies if it was difficult to hear Peter amongst all the various train announcements wherever he was in Germany. Great discussion, Joyce. Did you enjoy that?
Yes, really enjoyed it. It was a nice discussion.
Yeah, I think so. So Joyce, as you know from before, is an endourologist, doesn't specialize much in prostate cancer, but hey, anyone working in prostate cancer, not just urologists, anyone working in healthcare really looks towards these sorts of pivotal studies, and a 21-year update on the screening study is amazing to hear. So congrats to Monique and really everybody impressive. At ERSPC for that amazing work. It is really stunning to think of the amount of work it takes to report a 21-year study, Joyce, doesn't it?
Yes, as we said, I think in the 1990s, a lot of us were still in high school. So it's impressive publication, 20-year follow-up. You don't see that too often.
I know. And if you think even of the sort of audience listening to this podcast, what were you doing 21 years ago when these great folk were planning this amazing study that we still refer to today? And great to see it in European Urology and so on. Yes. And our second paper is very, very interesting for any of you who are interested in novel imaging for prostate cancer, which I am. This is the Lighthouse study, a prospective multi-center study of a new tracer called rh-PSMA. And for this, I caught up with study author Tobias Maurer and nuclear medicine specialist Stefano Fanti to hear a bit about the Lighthouse study and our interpretation of it compared to other PSMA studies. Let's cross over and hear what they had to say. So I'm really looking forward to getting our teeth into this next paper, this next highlight we have from the October edition of European Urology. This is the Lighthouse study. It is a prospective phase 3 multi-center study of a novel PSMA tracer, a fluorinated tracer called rh-PSMA 7.3. So I know a bit about PSMA. We've been using it in our center for many years. We've done many studies, but I have no idea what this novel tracer is. But I'm very pleased to be joined by two experts who certainly do. We have urologist Dr. Tobias Maurer from Hamburg, from the Martini Clinic, who's one of the lead authors on the study. And we are also joined by nuclear medicine physician extraordinaire Stefano Fanti from the University of Bologna, who's had a long-standing interest predating PSMA in PET imaging for prostate cancer. So Tobias and Stefano, thank you for joining us on this episode of the European Urology podcast.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Fantastic. And Tobias, I will go to you first, and we don't want to go in great detail. We'll put links in the show notes to this paper, but can you briefly summarize what is this Lighthouse study of this novel rh-PSMA tracer and tell us a bit about the results?
Well, first of all, it's really a great pleasure to talk with you two about the study, and on behalf of the Lighthouse study group that I can present here a little bit the paper. It's a novel tracer. You mentioned the name already. It's a fluorinated radio-hybrid PSMA 7.3, so a long name. And we use this tracer for the diagnostic workup for primary staging in unfavorable intermediate and high-risk prostate cancer patients, and compared it basically, how does it perform for lymph node staging? And we found that also with other PSMA tracers, comparable to other PSMA tracers, are very high specificity, 96%. The sensitivity in this study was 24% by maturity read, but also this is in line with other tracers. So I think you now want to know, why should we have another PSMA tracer around with already several ones in clinical use? And this tracer has some features which I think are very interesting. One is the radiohybrid approach, and that radiohybrid means that you can use the same tracer, the same affinity of the tracer, but label it with different radio metals. So you can use it for diagnostic purposes, but also for therapy, just by labeling it with other radio metals without changing the affinity and the specificity of the tracer. Then this is a tracer which also shows a limited urinary activity, low bladder background, for example. And this is, important if you want to really examine structures around it. So prostate or maybe lymph nodes, which are very close to the bladder or the ureter, or might be mistaken as urinary activity. More so in the biochemical recurrence setting, of course, with low PSA values. And then the third thing is that it is labeled again also with fluorinated F18, which has a longer half-life, 120 minutes, compared to gallium-68, which has a little bit over an hour half-life. So that means it can be distributed to other sites where there is no cyclotron. And also, if you produce F18 via a cyclotron, you can produce large amounts. So these are some of the features of this new tracer, which makes it interesting, I think.
For sure. Stefano, what do you think?
Oh, yes, indeed. It's absolutely very interesting. I have to say, as a general concept, we all know PSMA tracers are a basket concept. So many different molecules, many different radiopharmaceuticals that each one has very specific and individual characteristic. But at the same time, they share the most important characteristic. That's the ligand capability to the target. And given that probably many of the people here are not radiopharmacists, I'd like to tell you, those different PSMA are like wines. I'm Italian, so I have to pay a little bit of tribute to my heritage. So wines can be considered as a great category, but they can also be, let's say, red and white. And into the red, you have the Cabernet Sauvignon, you have the Merlot, you have many others. And if you go into Cabernet, you have hundreds of different brands. So as Tobias said, okay, we have fluorinated and gallium labeled PSMA, which is different mainly for logistical issue. And if you go into the fluorinated, then you have the fluorinated 1007, fluorinated rh-PYL, different other characteristics. As a matter of fact, it's almost impossible to have the ideal one. It would be like a beautiful, bodied, fresh, and very cheap red wine. Does not exist, I'm sorry. So what would you like to have is an ideal tracer with very, very low urinary excretion, very, very specific uptake, capability to be very sensitive and catch whatever. Does not exist so far. So we have little advantages and little con with every tracer. And you have to find a good balance because, again, some have more established literature data, others have a longer half-life, others have a very low urinary excretion, like the fluorinated 1007, but a very high non-specific bone uptake, which of course nobody wants to have. So it's always taking into account, and possibly, you know, as a nuclear medicine physician, I pretend to be like a sommelier. I want to figure out what is best for your dinner. And that's the way we may contribute to that.
Well, that's a great analogy, Tobias, isn't it? And is my conclusion at the end of the day that if I like red wine, and it's my preference, and I'm not that fussed about whether it's a Pinot Noir or a Cabernet Sauvignon, as long as it's good quality, reliable, I know when I pull that bottle off the shelf, I'm going to enjoy it. it doesn't really matter which tracer we choose. Is that a reasonable summary?
Absolutely, yes, by my side.
Yeah,
I think also with some hesitation, I would say, because if you're not in primary setting but in biochemicals recurrence setting, if you have low PSA values and you want to know is there a local recurrence or not, despite any pelvic lymph node, for example, then it would be wise to have a tracer at hand that shows low urinary activity. Yeah. But otherwise, I think this is very specific finding, but otherwise they are comparable, yes.
And can I ask you, Stefano, with one of the other fluorinated tracers, 1007, we know there's more background bone uptake, and we need to be careful in interpreting those images compared to DCF-PYL. Have you any comments or experience with this radiohybrid, this rh-PSMA, in terms of its background bone uptake?
Yes, now it's becoming more and more clear that this non-specific bone uptake is frequent, is observed not only in the ribs, but could be almost everywhere. And it's mainly a matter of expertise. I mean, once you get familiar with the findings, you say you reset your threshold of positivity, then you do avoid false positive calls. But it's very important to reset your criteria. So don't pretend to report one tracer as it would be another. You should be very aware of the pro and cons again. I would personally favor, depending on the indication, something more specific, I have to say. But at the same time, as Tobias said, you have to pay attention why the patient is referred to you. So for example, if it's about treating the patient with a theranostic approach or with lutetium PSMA, well, honestly, every tracer is fine. So if you're really very thirsty, even the technetium or the whatever labeled PSMA, which is sort of a beer, okay, could be okay.
And Tobias, can I ask you about the sensitivity? You commented that this study, all of these patients reported had a pelvic lymph node dissection, so they set a high standard of histopathology for determining the sensitivity, and the sensitivity is 25 or less than 30%, so consistent with those other prospective studies that have used histopathology as the gold standard. But I was interested, so in other words, it's about the same, isn't it? But I was interested in the very nice editorial written by Louise Emmett and Frederic Pouliot, where they comment that when we report sensitivity like that, we have to understand that it is a bit underestimated because it's only including patients with a pelvic lymph node dissection, not the other patients in the study who had, extrapelvic disease, who didn't undergo a lymph node dissection. So I think that while people might draw attention to that figure, it's because we are bearing in mind it's only patients with a pelvic lymph node dissection, and we are using PET scanning to determine extrapelvic disease as well. And that sensitivity isn't fully accounted for. If you see retroperitoneal mets or distant bone mets, because the specificity is high, Louise and Frederic comment that we need to understand that's why the sensitivity may be underestimated. Have you any thoughts on that sensitivity issue?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think first of all, specificity, I think, is the higher issue. That is what we really want to have. Sensitivity will never be perfect, of course, because small lesions, you just will not be able to detect whatever tracer you're using. And it depends also when you look at the whole cohort without surgery, for example, then your sensitivity rates are higher. If you really have pathology as gold standard and maybe even immunohistochemistry showing small PSMA PET positive, immunohistochemic positive lesions, then your sensitivity goes down. And yes, you're also right that all those patients had also conventional imaging, and most of them had even no disease at all in the lymph nodes, certainly no metastatic disease. And in the efficacy analysis cohort where we looked for metastatic disease, we found several patients who had metastatic disease. So the sensitivity, yes, would be higher if we include those patients. But then again, I think it's more about specificity in this regard here.
Yeah, totally agree. So it's an important paper. Congratulations to you and senior author Brian Chapin and everyone for contributing it. I think, Stefano, my take on it is it just adds further evidence to demonstrate the accuracy of PSMA PET-CT compared with conventional imaging. But in finishing, you know, the nuke med community, having attended meetings with you like the EANM, which you chaired last year, there's a stream of these novel tracers coming through that we're just getting adjusted to as clinicians, as urologists, radiation oncologists, medical oncologists. Can I ask you to tell us what else you think might be on the horizon for PSMA-based imaging in the coming years? Is this hybrid type tracer, you know, something we should watch out more for, these tracers that can be also labeled with a theranostic agent? Is that what the future will be? And is it all fluorinated? Is that what we need to do for those practical reasons that Tobias said earlier? It can be difficult to keep up with all the novel tracers coming through, but we'd be grateful to you for your expert opinion on what we should be watching for.
Wow, that's not easy to address, I have to tell you. It's very active because there's never happened before in nuclear medicine to have such huge success either on the diagnostic and therapeutical application. So there are more coming, some for purely marketing reason, other for making logistical even more convenient. So for example, fluoride is fine, but if you want a longer half-life, you can move to copper, and there are ongoing trials on the use of copper. We'll see in the very future. To be honest, my main enthusiasm is rather in finding new application. As to say, for example, we have never been successful in diagnosis, meaning primary diagnosis, and we have some ongoing trial on PSMA targeted biopsy. So rather than, you know, optimizing already good results, because as Tobias said, the specificity is very good, why don't we move to application that so far have never been demonstrated? Or regarding the theranostic approach, rather to move early on the stage of the disease, the use of this, as to say, so far it's just in metastatic CRPC, we want to get it in the history of the patient, the possibility earlier. So my enthusiasm is rather than in new radiopharmaceuticals, in new application.
Fantastic. Well, it's great to see this lovely paper in European Urology. Again, thank you, Tobias and Stefano, for joining us. We'll include the links in the show notes if you want to dive deeper into the Lighthouse study. And of course, European Urology will always be a destination for very high quality prospective PSMA imaging and theranostic studies. So do watch out for more articles. Thank you again, gentlemen. Yeah, well, there you go, Joyce. That was a fascinating discussion. I learned a lot myself about novel tracers. It was great to hear from Tobias and Stefano Fanti. And next up, we have Nikita Bhatt. Did you enjoy Nikita's segment last month, Joyce, where she had a look at what else caught her eye in the journal?
Yes, it's great to have her input on the several manuscripts in the journal. We have a lot of oncology articles, and it's nice to highlight some of the non-oncology subjects. And it's great to hear from a young urologist's perspectives on some of the topics which are discussed in the European Urology. So I really like that item.
Fantastic. Let's cross over and hear what caught Nikita's eye this month. So we're now joined again by Dr. Nikita Bhatt. Nikita, senior trainee from the UK, very involved in BURST and various other organizations supporting research around the place. And Nikita will take us around the rest of the journal to see what caught her eye this month. Nikita, thank you for joining us again.
Hi, Declan. Hi, Joyce. Many thanks for inviting me on this podcast again. We have another great issue from European Urology in October, and I have picked out some interesting and varied articles for our audience. So the first one is a Platinum Opinion article called The Plant-Based Prescription, How Dietary Change Can Improve Both Urological and Planetary Health, from Stacey Loeb's group by Cole et al. They basically discuss the impact of meat consumption on genitourinary health and the environment. So in keeping with last month's theme, this is another area where we can do something to impact the climate crisis. And as a vegetarian myself, I can vouch for the benefits of a plant-based diet. So definitely worth having a read.
Yeah, it's great to see European
great.
urology go off-piste a little bit like that, Joyce, isn't it? And do something that is of great interest to people, but is not your classic randomized trial or, you know, prospective, highly soon-to-be highly cited study. I love seeing this type of variety in the journal.
Yeah, it's really good to see that journals are addressing these, I think, really important topics. And it's a little bit confronting, I think. I really love to eat. I eat everything. But it's really good to consider that it has an impact on the environment, but also on urological conditions and overall being. And it is important to also incorporate dietary counseling into our practice. And as a stone doctor, we do that regularly. But I think also for other urological conditions, it's really good to take this into account also when you counsel your patients. So great start.
Yeah, and isn't it true to say, Nikita, that restaurants around the world are doing a lot more to embrace plant-based diets? It's a lot more interesting, a lot more variety than there used to be. So any of these efforts to change conceptions and help us try a little more are great. And especially if, as Stacey Loeb shows, it may improve urological health. So yeah, important messages for our patients, but ourselves as clinicians and consumers as well, I think.
Absolutely. Yeah, lots of vegan, vegetarian options out there. And so my second article then is a research letter from Naeem Bojani's group and his colleagues on industry payments to American editorial board members of major urology journals. This is quite an interesting read, as authors tend to investigate the American editorial board members from various sort of top urological journals and the financial reimbursement that they receive from industry and how this can conflict with their role as an editorial board member. It's a short piece, but I think it's worth a read. It definitely gives you something to think about. And I think it would be quite interesting to see how the journals and the editorial board members respond to this quite controversial, if I may say so, article.
Yeah, I think so. And the purpose of your piece is not to summarize all this in detail, but hopefully our readers and viewers will go and look it up. We'll put it in the show notes. But look, this is really important, isn't it? This whole topic of transparency in our dealings with industry. And in the US, it's very above board. They have this Sunshine Act, which means that industry must report in a totally transparent fashion any payments or benefits in kind, hotel rooms, etc., etc. So, you know, these sorts of articles are very interesting and that we should welcome them. We should all be super transparent. We certainly are here, but I think it's very important there's visibility about this so we fully understand and disclose relationships. There's no problem with having industry relationships. I'm sure Joyce would say that in very heavily technology dependent subspecialties like endourology. It's essential for the development of techniques, but likewise it's very important that we declare all that, Joyce, isn't it?
Yeah, it's really important. And it's also in the Netherlands, it's really a hot topic at this time. And there is really a benefit, I think, to work with industry to get your practice at high level. And also, as Declan mentioned, in endourology, we have a lot of instruments, and you really can help in the whole evolution of instruments. But you need to be very clear about the financial relationships, and not to give the impression that there's really a negative conflict of interest in what you do. So, like you said, Nikita, I'm very I wonder how the journals and the editors will respond to these findings. It's a really interesting read. Yeah.
Yeah, so then the third and final article I wanted to highlight is a systematic review comparing outcomes between RCTs on open versus robot-assisted cystectomy in bladder cancer. First author Ketrapal, but it's John Kelly's group from UCLH and other surgeons across the UK that have contributed. The review reports advantages of the robotic approach over the open approach in some aspects of perioperative recovery, along the lines of what we would expect. I will let the readers find out more about this themselves when they read the article. For me, it's another reason to love the robot, not that I need many more. So that's the third and final article for me.
Yeah, of course.
Another reason to love the robot, Declan.
Well, there you go.
I-
That's coming from non-oncology experts like yourselves. So it's not just an oncology tool anymore, is it? But European Urology, one of I think the most valuable parts of the journal that I've enjoyed over the past 10 or 15 years are these high quality systematic reviews and collaborative reviews. I think to get review articles published in European Urology means you've met a certain very high bar, and these tend to be very well cited. So thanks, Nikita, for highlighting one of the systematic reviews. And these ones tend to be very, very popular go-to things for residents in training, as well as those of us who just want an update on an area. So yeah, thank you for highlighting an excellent systematic review. And thank you again for looking around the journal this month. We will put those papers in the show notes so you can go and find them. And of course, there are other articles in there that we haven't had time to cover. So thank you, Nikita, and we'll be seeing you again next month.
Thanks so much. See you.
Yeah, thanks again, Nikita. She puts a lot of work into scanning ahead to see what articles are there, and she'll be sharing out that duty with other young urologists attached to the EAU, senior trainees or younger consultants. So we're very grateful to Nikita and her team for contributing that section. I think it's an important bit, isn't it? We can't highlight everything in the journal in a relatively short podcast like this, Joyce, but I really do encourage people to have a listen to Nikita's articles. And finally then this month, as we mentioned at the start, I had a catch up recently in Milan with current Editor-in-Chief Alberto Briganti and past Editor-in-Chief Francesco Montorsi about the journey the journal has been on over the past 15 years or so, and where they see academic publishing going in urology. So I hope you enjoyed this segment. I certainly enjoyed chatting to these two eminent editorial chiefs from European Urology. So I'm joined for this segment of the European Urology podcast by the current Editor-in-Chief and 2 times past Editor-in-Chief, Alberto Briganti and Francesco Montorsi. Thank you for joining us on the European Urology podcast, Francesco and Alberto.
Thank you. Thank you, Declan.
Good to see you. So we're here in Milan. I'm actually visiting here. We've talked about it a bit on our other podcast, GUcast, and we've had a chat with both these gentlemen about San Rafael. But today we want to talk about the journal, about European Urology. And Francesco, you must be quite proud to see your protege take on the reins after all these years. How does it make you feel?
I am so happy. I am so happy. And if I go back with my memory to 2005, when the discussions about the one who should have followed Professor Claude Schulman, who was my mentor at the journal. And I think that Claude made a significant contribution in the growth of the journal because it started from nothing. And by the way, if any one of those who are watching us happen to meet Professor Schulman, don't forget to ask him anecdotes and stories about the years when European Urology was founded by himself. And he developed the name of the journal, for example. So if I think back and now seeing Albi taking that position in a journal, we were so small, we were no one, we were nothing. And now the journal is #1 really worldwide. It's a great honor. I'm delighted to see that the thing went on.
Of course, you're absolutely right. It's starting a journal, and Dr. Schulman will always have that great credit. But to be honest, the journal was not in great shape back then compared to the J. Urol was already very well established. It's not like nowadays when Alberto took it over. It's this superstar, Champions League winning type of team that he's now got recruited onto. But when you joined that journal, it was quite challenging, I'm sure. I must say, remembering back then, I didn't rank the journal very high. We didn't read it very much, I must say. It didn't attract the best papers. And
well, you're right. It was a European journal, and with all the Europeans having in their mind, I was the first one. If I have a good paper, that will go to J-Urol.
Yeah.
And if I have a paper which is slightly less important, it will go to European Urology or BJU. At that time, it was not BJUY, it was BJU. And then, so we thought we should do everything we can to make things happen. And so I was extremely lucky in having, well, first of all, Kathy. I hope that she's going to watch this podcast.
The great Kathy Pierce.
So, yes. As an anecdote, when I was given my title as new editor-in-chief, so I was in Milan, and I knew I needed somebody helping me. So I was looking for an editorial assistant. And I did talk to 8 ladies in my office, And I thought that all of them were excellent. And so I didn't know who to pick up. So I was so lucky because for whatever reason, I decided to pick up the name of Kathy. And so that was an excellent move. And also, not only because Kathy was special, but also a little bit of luck, which is always needed. And so from that time, from that year on, it was every day, 7 o'clock in the morning for an hour together doing things and always thinking how we can change.
And what did you do then? So what transformed it? Because was it 8 years, 8-year reign? By the time you finished 8 years, it was like superstar journals, speeding ahead of the rest, very high impact factor. So it wasn't just, a few ideas or posting one or two papers.
Well, listen, to be very honest, there were many things that needed to be done. And in my very humble opinion, they were under the eyes of everybody. But the majority of the editors of many journals would not see them for whatever reason. So we just planned things, Kathy, myself, and the associate editors together. I think we made changes that were obvious and that somebody had to make. And everybody gave a contribution. The idea of words of wisdom having Fritz Schroeder, the idea of surgery in motion, and then the idea of having a paper being reviewed in 10 days. Yeah. Because as an author from my side, it was impossible to send a paper to J-Roll and having it back in 3 months. Yeah. And most of the times would be a reject. Yeah. So which would mean, well, I've been waiting for 3 months. I remember that we were using surface mail at that time, and then faxes. Remember the fax, which is not existing anymore?
All these pages.
So it was at the time for a change. And I always thought, whenever something goes very well, then it's time for you to change everything, because otherwise you sit down. So we did it many times during my years. But now it's time for Alberto.
It's time for Alberto. So
here's the new thing.
You were only a child when he took over back in 2006, Alberto. So when did you take an interest in? I know you were always interested in academic work. We grew up together in Europe. I knew that. But what about the journal? That's not everybody is interested in getting involved on the other side, on the peer review and the editing side. When did you take an interest? Was it watching Francesco?
Yes, Declan, you're completely right. So back in 2005. I was still a resident in urology, but this reminds me and highlights, I believe, the importance of having a mentor guiding you through your career, because actually back then, I am kind of honored to say that I also worked for the journal, not officially, but like behind the curtains in a way, helping finding new names or key opinion leaders, reaching them and trying to understand the future of research, where the fields of more interest from the readership perspective was going. So I actually still remember that I was on the beach with my family back then, and I had this recommendation to find the key opinion leader in a certain topic. So I was using Scopus back then, trying to understand who were the best publisher in the field. In the beach with my family, working August time. So everything, I mean, if we put everything together, I can say that it has been a real process, right? In which you get interest in something along the way, during time, and just finding new ways of using your brain in a way, because we always say when we trying to raise new, young, talented people, that surgery is only a part of our job. And the clinical part is one thing, but then investing in something else is very important for our brains.
The other thing that was happening, I'm just remembering back to that change at the time, a few things that strike me. One is you changed the look of the journal. So it went from the orangey yellow thing to the platinum journal, and you called it. So is this must
Which
be...
is still, by the way, existing.
Yeah,
because,
it's a Milanese style thing.
I have to anticipate something, if I may, that we will change the cover of the journal soon, but the platinum color and the platinum idea will stay. As many of the ideas that were launched back in 2006 will stay, like surgery motion, the idea of having brief correspondency, so shorter articles.
Much more attractive.
And I think this is way more attractive than having long articles with thousands of tables.
But also the collaborative reviews you brought in, and I remember this because you you were mixing up younger people coming through with more senior people. So we got a chance to write with these very experienced people. And it was around that time where books were beginning to go on the way out. They were too slow because now the internet was here. And collaborative review articles for us became a very important way of getting up to date on a topic. So
sorry to interrupt you, Declan, but can I take this occasion just to recall and remember my very first collaborative review, which I wrote, and I was invited by Professor Montorsi, of course, on the role of pelvic lymph node dissection in prostate cancer, that with 2006. And I had the honor to collaborate with your student back then, and I actually realized how much he gave to the field and the importance of having a person who guide you. I mean, he spent hours, nights, just to correct my drafts and to highlight weaknesses of what I was writing. I mean, what a person. It's not usual to have personalities like this who invest time in a small, tiny review, which indeed might be the first step of the career of the younger contributor. So I would like just to take this opportunity to remember the personality, the importance of yours.
And I remember through that process, actually, I'm just remembering this as I speak to you, being involved with some of them. And so you've written the draft and you've been dealing with maybe the most senior author, and then it goes out to the other 8 or 9 authors, and you'll get a response from 6, and then 2 or 3, usually senior people, haven't replied. But I remember Kathy and Francesco would kick them off the paper. If they don't reply within a week, they're gone. So that was also, I think, changed. It was changing time. It was saying we demand speed, and I think the speed thing was very important, still is important today. That it's not just the review process, it's everything to do with it, because you want up-to-date stuff. You want to get it.
We lost quite a number of top names in the area in that time. We lost quite a number of top names that were part of the old editorial board member, because we did try to use them again, but they were not doing things. So I don't know if I still have a collection of insult letters that I got at that time, but I said, who cares, we keep going. And I would like to echo what I'll be saying for a number of individuals. Urs Studer was always behind our shoulders, always supporting. At that time, there were the first cell phones going around, so we would exchange phone calls, but typically the phone call would come from Bern to me. And the start of the conversation would be, I can't understand how you can be the editor of this journal because you don't understand a thing. And so, but this was his way to say, I want you to do more because this is our journal of the EU. He was always there at all our editorial board meetings. He was always sitting first row and submitting his best articles to us. By the way, but true, he would devote so much time to reviewing papers like Fritz Schroeder, many others who were really very top.
But I must say that there was some change back then, but compared to when you handed the journal over to Jim Cato in fantastic shape, and he again took it on, and this has been an era of enormous change, because this was now moving into the dropping of print, open access, mandatory open access publication, depending on your grant, cascade journals, a lot of competition. Alberto, you could see all this coming, and we'll talk next about the whole communication revolution, but what about all these big changes, open access, cascade journals, et cetera, et cetera? There's a lot of challenges for journals to keep their head above water and keep ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. So I feel a lot of pressure now, because now, as you were saying, I'm taking the journal which is in excellent shape, which is now considered the top journal in the field. And of course, it's tough when you receive such a heritage and from such predecessors like Jim also. So he made a great job. So he really was able to attract the best science, to understand how the fields were changing. I think about introduction of omics, for example, that attracted a lot of attention. And 10 years ago, nobody was in a way paying attention of the importance of genomic signatures, epigenetics, and so forth. The impact of imaging. So he realized indeed the importance of integration of multiple specialties in the journal itself. So many collaborations in the field of imaging, omics, and translational research in general, which I believe changed significantly over the last 10 years or so. So Jim made a great job, and I really want to congratulate with him again because he made a fantastic job with all the team, and also investing a lot on what you started as well in terms of statistical review, for example, and increasing the level of what we publish, giving also rules and guiding the authors to produce something which should be methodologically sound and which should review by those who actually make them every day, and we can all derive benefits from having statistical people revising our papers, because at the end of the day we don't have the full knowledge they have. So several things which improved significantly over the last years, but what also happened, I believe, it's a big increase in challenging in new journals that are taking the lead. For example, I'm speaking about new journals that have been launched in the field of oncology, and we have competition now. So it's not that easy nowadays to get the best possible papers in that field, given also the great competitions that we have in terms of journals. And many journals are investing a lot in several activities we are also interested in. So it's tough time for an editor, but still very exciting, because what we want indeed is to increase even more the level of the journal, and in a way to broaden the readership. So we don't want to reach only urologists. Urology is such a great discipline where you have different possible links with different disciplines, and I believe that there is room for making even wider readership and attracted by our topics.
Exactly. That's the last thing I wanted to speak to you about, because it's one thing to make sure that quality is high, which you'll measure still by impact factor to some degree, that the work is well recognized by the field, but it's such a noisy landscape to get the attention of a reader, and the traditional long format of 3,000 words, etc., in a written bit of paper or on an iPad or whatever, is now being challenged by people preferring to get their content through short form videos, tweets, blogs, whatever it's called, podcasting. So do you feel that the journal is well equipped going forward to make sure it's not just the quality's up there, but that we have engaged the readership and that we're outputting our content in the most convenient and competitive manner for the reader?
Well, after you decided to join the team and to accept my invitation, I would say that we are well equipped to face the new era of novel dissemination strategies, which is very important, because we do not any longer live the era of longer articles of time dedicated to reading in a way which has pros and cons. So we actually now need to face the fact that the way of communicating science has become very different from the past. So we need to stick to short messages, shorter articles, more straightforward ways of disseminating science. On the other hand, we need to be very careful, because sometimes if you read the best possible article or any interesting article, sometimes the devil is in the details. So you really need to go into deep data, even to the supplementary materials that sometimes have important information which allow the reader to better understand the meaning of the message delivered. So from one side, short message and a straightforward way of dissemination, but on the other side, be again very careful in reading in a correct way the paper you're interested in.
And Francesco, finally, we'll leave the last word to you. Where do you see urology publishing in 10 years' time? Will we still have traditional journals, or will we be overtaken by video and TikTok?
I think that there will be room for everything. And I was thinking that when we started, probably I was already an assistant editor in the team of European Urology when Claude Schulman was the editor-in-chief. And I remember that during the last editorial board, he would show a study showing that of every single article published in peer-reviewed literature, more or less 10% of these articles would be read, 90% of the articles would just be disregarded. So everything you guys have been doing, are going to do to facilitate the diffusion of these new information is essential. So there will be people who are happy to listen to a podcast or watch a video or whatever, but there will still be lots of people who will be happy to read the paper and to make notes. Probably those will be more in the area of academic research, but I'm sure that perhaps I'm driving the car, I'm listening to one of your excellent podcasts, and a good idea comes to my mind, and I call one of my residents or fellows and tell him, well, I just listened to this, we should do that. So there will be space for everything.
I think you're right, and I agree, and that's my view on it. Is I think the quality of a peer review paper and prospective research will always be highly valued, but what will change is the engines, the platforms we use to drive out that information in a credible and in a well-governed manner, and that's the opportunity we have, I think, with European Urology over the next few years. Thank you very much, Alberto and Francesco, for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we've come to the end of this podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you for listening. This is a monthly podcast, so please tune in next time. In November, we will have a new episode. And as said earlier, don't forget to subscribe and please leave your comments. If you have new ideas, if you have new input for us, please let us know, and we will take this for our next episode. So thank you so much for your attention. Thank you for listening, and hope to see you again next time.
Thank you.